The betrayal begins. Ethan Reynolds never thought twice about Claire Daniels. She was just the babysitter, a reliable young woman who took care of Ben and Lily when he and Rebecca were busy with work. She arrived on time, did her job, and left without any issues. At least, that's what he believed. It started subtly. At first, Claire seemed like any other babysitter. She played with the kids, helped with their homework, and kept the house tidy. She was good at what she did, and Rebecca was happy with her. "She's great with them," Rebecca had said one evening after a long workday. "It's nice to have someone trustworthy." Ethan had agreed, unaware that trust could be so easily manipulated. The first time, he noticed something was off. It was small. Claire had brushed against him in the kitchen, standing a little too close when passing him a plate. He didn't think much of it. People had different boundaries, and she was young, maybe just overly familiar. But then it happened again. The touches lingered. A hand on his shoulder that slid down his arm before pulling away. A gaze that lasted a second too long. Then came the wardrobe changes, sweaters replaced with tight tank tops, leggings swapped for short skirts. The way she laughed at his jokes, tilting her head and twirling a strand of hair between her fingers. Ethan dismissed it all. He was a married man. He had no interest in Claire, and besides, she was just a babysitter. But Claire had different ideas. The night it all changed. It had been 5 days since Rebecca left for a business trip. 5 days of balancing work, parenting, and exhaustion. Claire had been helping out more than usual, staying later than her shift required. "Are you sure you don't mind?" Ethan asked one evening as she loaded the dishwasher. She smiled. "I love being here. It feels like home." The way she said it made something in Ethan's stomach twist. After putting the kids to bed, he settled into his home office, finishing a few emails before heading to the kitchen to grab a drink. Claire was still there, standing by the counter with a glass of wine in her hand. "You're still here?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She grinned. "Just making sure you don't overwork yourself." Ethan shook his head, reaching for a water bottle from the fridge. "I appreciate the help, Claire, but you should probably head home." She stepped closer, her voice dropping into something softer. "You work so hard, Ethan. You deserve to relax." Her fingers grazed his wrist. He tensed. "Claire," he began, but she cut him off. "I think about you a lot," she whispered. Ethan's entire body went rigid. He turned, staring at her in shock, waiting for her to laugh, to say it was a joke. But there was nothing playful in her expression, only certainty. "I know you feel it too," she continued, stepping closer. Ethan stepped back, his hands going up like a barrier. "Stop. This is inappropriate." Her eyes darkened. "Why?" "Because of Rebecca." "Yes," he said firmly. "Because I'm married. Because this is wrong." Claire laughed softly, shaking her head. "You don't have to pretend. I see the way you look at me." "I don't look at you," Ethan snapped, anger rising in his voice. "This needs to stop." But she didn't listen. In one swift motion, she closed the space between them and pressed her lips against his. Ethan recoiled instantly, gripping her shoulders and pushing her away. "What the hell are you doing?" Claire stumbled back, her face flushing with something unreadable. Shock, embarrassment, then something darker. "Claire, you need to leave. Now." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. His heart was pounding. He had no idea that rejecting her had just sealed his fate. Because Claire Daniels wasn't just leaving. She was planning. The setup. Claire walked quickly down the darkened street, fists clenched at her sides. Ethan had rejected her, her perfect image of him, the kind, gentle man who she had imagined as hers, had shattered. Instead of the warmth and desire she had expected, he had pushed her away, dismissed her, made her feel small. No, she refused to be nothing. By the time she reached her apartment, the humiliation had twisted into something sharper. Ethan Reynolds would not walk away from this unscathed. He thought he could throw her aside like she was nothing. He was wrong. She sat at her desk, pulling out her phone. A text wouldn't be enough. Neither would whispers. If she wanted to ruin him, she needed something bigger, something undeniable, something that would destroy him. She opened a notepad and began typing. Bruises, self-inflicted, but real enough to sell the story. Torn clothing, proof of a struggle. Tears, a voice too shaken to speak, but brave enough to tell the truth. A slow smile spread across her face. Ethan Reynolds thought rejecting her was the end of it. He was wrong. The arrest. Ethan woke to the sound of pounding on the front door. It was early. Too early. Groggy, he swung his legs over the bed, rubbing his eyes. The knocking came again, harder this time. Beside him, Rebecca stirred. Who the hell is that? She mumbled. No idea, Ethan muttered, already pushing himself up. He made his way downstairs, still barefoot on the cool hardwood floor. When he opened the door, the rush of cold morning air hit him, along with something worse. 2 uniformed officers stood on his doorstep. Behind them, a patrol car idled at the curb, its blue and red lights flashing ominously. Mr. Reynolds, the taller officer asked. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Yeah. You're under arrest. It took a moment for the words to register. What? Before he could process what was happening, the officer grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind his back. The other reached for his belt, unhooking a pair of handcuffs. Wait, hold on, Ethan protested, trying to turn. What's going on? You're being charged with sexual assault, the officer said, voice devoid of emotion. The words hit like a brick to the chest. What the hell are you talking about? Ethan struggled, but the cuffs snapped around his wrists. Upstairs, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Rebecca was coming down. What's going on? Her voice was sharp, fully awake now. Then she saw him. Saw the handcuffs. Saw the officers. Saw the patrol car. A shadow of horror crossed her face. Ethan. Before he could say another word, Claire stepped into view. She stood a few feet away, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red and swollen from forced tears. Her lip trembled. A deep bruise marred her cheek. Her blouse was torn at the sleeve. Rebecca's breath hitched. Claire. Claire flinched at the sound of her name, shrinking back as if the very sight of Ethan terrified her. He attacked me, she whispered. Rebecca gasped. Ethan's stomach dropped. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the morning. This was really happening, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The walls close in. Ethan Reynolds sat in the back of the police cruiser, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. The metal dug into his wrists, but the pain was nothing compared to the panic rising in his chest. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. One moment, he was waking up in his own bed, expecting a normal morning. The next, he was being accused of something unspeakable. He turned his head, looking through the tinted window at his house. Rebecca stood in the doorway, frozen in shock. Her wide eyes darted between the officers and Claire, who remained wrapped in a blanket, looking fragile and broken. It was a perfect performance. Ethan could see it now, as clear as day. Claire had set this up. She had planned every detail, the bruises, the torn clothing, the trembling voice. He wanted to scream, to tell Rebecca not to believe her, but the doors slammed shut, and the car began to move. The house, his home, shrank in the distance, and with it, so did his entire life. The interrogation, the ride to the police station was a blur. Ethan kept replaying everything in his head, searching for the moment this nightmare had truly begun. Had it been the first time Claire touched his arm? The way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching? Or had it been the moment he pushed her away, sealing his fate? By the time they reached the station, dread settled in his bones like lead. The officers led him through the precinct, their grips firm as they walked him past rows of desks filled with other cops going about their day. Some glanced up, recognizing him. Others didn't care. But the ones who knew his name, the ones who had seen him in the news before, the successful businessman, the devoted father, they stared at him with something close to disgust. He was already guilty in their eyes. They shoved him into a metal chair inside a cold interrogation room. A single light buzzed overhead, casting shadows against the concrete walls. Ethan's breathing was slow and controlled, but inside, his mind was screaming. A few minutes later, the door swung open, and a man in his mid-50s stepped inside. He wore a worn-out suit, his graying hair slicked back. He carried a folder in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. Detective James Holloway. He sat down across from Ethan, flipping open the file. His expression was unreadable. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, taking a sip of his coffee, "do you know why you're here?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I have a pretty good guess." Holloway nodded, as if he expected that response. "Claire Daniels filed a report against you early this morning. Said you attacked her in your home while your wife was away." "That's a lie," Ethan said immediately. "I never touched her." Holloway didn't react. He set the coffee down, glancing at the file. "She has bruises, a torn blouse, medical records confirming signs of struggle." Ethan leaned forward. "Because she staged it, she's lying. I rejected her, and this is her revenge." Holloway exhaled, tapping a pen against the desk. "So let me get this straight. You're saying a young woman who has no criminal history, who has been working for your family for months, decided to fake an entire attack just because you turned her down?" "Yes," Ethan said firmly. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Holloway leaned back in his chair, watching him carefully. "You're going to need a better defense than that." Ethan clenched his fists beneath the table. "I don't need a defense. I need you to do your job. Look at the security footage. Talk to my wife. She knows I would never." The detective cut him off with a slow shake of his head. "There's no security footage." Ethan froze. "What?" Holloway flipped a page in the file. "Your home security system was mysteriously disabled the night of the alleged attack. No recorded footage, no way to verify your story." Ethan's heart pounded. That wasn't possible. He had set up the security system himself. It recorded automatically, backing up to a hard drive. There was no way it could have been disabled unless Claire. She must have done it. She knew where the cameras were. She had been in the house enough times to figure out how to turn them off. Ethan swallowed hard. "Check the system logs," he said. "See when it was disabled." "I didn't do it." Holloway let out a long sigh. "We did check." He slid a printed report across the table. Ethan scanned it quickly, his pulse hammering. According to the logs, the system had been manually shut off from his account. From his phone. Ethan's stomach twisted. "She set me up," he said, barely above a whisper. "She must have hacked my account or—" "You expect me to believe a 22-year-old babysitter hacked into your security system?" Ethan met his gaze, his anger rising. "I don't care what you believe. I'm telling you the truth." Holloway studied him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he stood up and walked out. Ethan exhaled sharply, slumping back in his chair. This was really happening, and he had no idea how to stop it. The media storm. Rebecca sat on the couch, her phone buzzing relentlessly with notifications. The story had already spread. News outlets had picked it up within hours. Ethan Reynolds accused of assaulting babysitter. Respected businessman arrested in shocking case of betrayal. A family torn apart. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the headlines. Comments flooded the articles. Another predator exposed. Disgusting. He should rot in prison. Men like him think they can do whatever they want. The words felt like knives slicing through her skin. She had spent years building a life with Ethan. He was her husband, the father of her children. But Claire looked so broken when she spoke. Rebecca could still hear her shaking voice from that morning. I told him no, and he wouldn't stop. The words echoed in her skull. Had she been wrong about Ethan? Had she missed something? Her phone buzzed again. A message from her mother. Mom, are you okay? Please tell me this isn't true. Rebecca didn't reply, because she didn't know the answer. Claire's next move. Claire sat in her small apartment, scrolling through social media. Every post, every comment was exactly what she had wanted. People believed her. She had won. She had spent months being ignored, waiting for Ethan to see her, to realize that she was meant to be more than just a babysitter. But instead, he had humiliated her, and now he was paying the price. She smiled, tossing her phone onto the couch. Ethan Reynolds thought he could reject her and walk away unscathed. But Claire Daniels never lost, and she wasn't done yet. The web of lies tightens. Ethan Reynolds sat in a cold jail cell, his back against the hard wall, his wrists still aching from the tightness of the cuffs. The scent of stale sweat and disinfectant filled the air, mixing with the distant hum of voices and the occasional clang of metal doors slamming shut. He had been here for hours, maybe longer. Time felt irrelevant now. He ran his hands through his hair, his pulse still erratic from the whirlwind of the past few hours. One moment, he had been waking up in his own bed, and the next, his world had collapsed around him. Claire had planned this, every step. And no one was going to believe him. His lawyer hadn't arrived yet. The cops weren't interested in what he had to say. And Rebecca, a sharp ache pierced through his chest at the thought of his wife. She had been there when he was arrested. She had looked him in the eyes, and he had seen the doubt flicker in her expression. The disbelief, the fear. She hadn't even defended him. The realization settled in his gut like a stone. Rebecca was questioning everything. And that meant Claire was winning. Rebecca's struggle. Back at home, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She hadn't moved in hours, her thoughts spiraling in every direction. The house was eerily quiet. The kids were upstairs, unaware of the storm raging outside. They had asked about their dad, but she had sent them to their rooms, unsure of how to answer. Her phone buzzed again, lighting up with endless messages. Mom, Rebecca, call me now. Julia, her best friend. Tell me this isn't true. Please. Unknown number. Your husband is a monster. Divorce him while you can. She slammed her phone down, her pulse quickening. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone thought they knew the truth. But did she? She had spent years with Ethan. She had seen him at his worst and at his best. He was kind, devoted, a good father. Could he really be capable of something so monstrous? Her stomach twisted at the thought. Claire's bruised face flashed through her mind, the trembling in her voice. I told him no, and he wouldn't stop. The words haunted her. She wanted to believe Ethan, but doubt had already sunk its claws deep inside her. And Claire knew it. The battle begins. A few hours later, Ethan sat in the dimly lit interrogation room, his fingers gripping the edge of the metal table. His lawyer, Stephen Calloway, had finally arrived, his sharp eyes scanning the file in front of him. Calloway was a seasoned defense attorney, known for his cold efficiency and ruthless tactics. But even he looked tense. This isn't good, he said, flipping through the paperwork. Ethan scoffed. No kidding. Calloway shot him a look before continuing. Claire's statement is airtight. She has medical records, witness testimony, and the public's sympathy. Ethan leaned forward. Witness testimony. Calloway nodded. One of your neighbors claimed they heard a woman screaming from your house that night. Ethan's blood ran cold. That's a lie. No one screamed. Claire left on her own, angry but unharmed. Calloway sighed. Doesn't matter. The prosecution will eat this up. Right now, in the eyes of the law, you're a predator, A husband who took advantage of a young woman under his employment. Ethan clenched his jaw. So what do we do? Calloway leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. We fight. But it's going to get ugly. Ethan exhaled. It already is. Calloway flipped to another page in the file. First things first, we need someone who can vouch for your character. Your wife is the most obvious choice. Ethan stiffened. Rebecca. She hadn't visited. She hadn't called. And that told him everything he needed to know. She didn't know if she believed him. And if she wasn't in his corner, his chances of getting out of this were slim. Claire's next move. Claire sat on her couch, scrolling through the latest news articles. Ethan Reynolds arrested in shocking assault case. A babysitter's brave stand against abuse. Will justice be served? The comment sections were filled with outrage. Another powerful man caught red-handed. I hope they throw him in prison for life. She's so brave. She deserves justice. Claire smiled, sipping her wine. It was all going perfectly. Ethan had underestimated her. He had thought he could push her away, reject her like she was nothing. Now, he was the one being discarded. And she wasn't finished yet. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found Rebecca's number. Her fingers hovered over the call button. Then she smirked. No, she had a better idea. Rebecca needed to be reminded of why she should hate Ethan. And Claire knew exactly how to do it. Rebecca's doubts grow. The next morning, Rebecca opened the door to find Claire standing outside, looking fragile and broken. Her cheek was still bruised, her lip slightly swollen. Can I come in? Claire asked, her voice small. Rebecca hesitated, then stepped aside. Claire walked in, glancing around the house as if she expected Ethan to appear at any moment. Then she turned to Rebecca, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't know where else to go. Rebecca swallowed hard. Claire, I don't know what to say. Claire sniffled. I know this is hard for you. I never wanted to ruin your family. But I couldn't stay silent. Rebecca looked away, her emotions warring inside her. I can't believe he would do this. Claire placed a gentle hand on her arm. I understand. But Rebecca, you need to think about your kids. Do you really want them growing up with a man like that? Rebecca's heart clenched. Claire's eyes filled with fresh tears. I thought he was a good man too. But the moment he pushed me down, the moment he ignored my cries, I knew. Rebecca felt her stomach twist violently. Please, Claire whispered, don't let him manipulate you. Rebecca's mind spun. Could Ethan really have done this? Or was Claire lying? The doubt was consuming her. And Claire knew it. Ethan's last hope. Ethan sat in his cell, staring at the cold concrete wall. He had no one. His wife was slipping away. His kids would grow up thinking their father was a monster. The world had turned against him. He was drowning. Until a guard approached, unlocking the door. You have a visitor. Ethan frowned. Moments later, he was led into the visitation room. He expected Rebecca. Maybe Calloway. Instead, he saw his best friend, Mark. Mark sat across from him, his expression hard. You look like hell, he said. Ethan let out a hollow laugh. I feel like it. Mark leaned forward. Tell me the truth. Did you do it? Ethan met his gaze, his voice steady. No. Mark studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Good. Ethan frowned. Good? Mark smirked. Because I'm about to help you burn Claire's world to the ground. Ethan exhaled, something flickering in his chest for the first time in days. Hope. The fight for truth begins. Ethan sat across from Mark in the visitation room, his hands shackled to the table. He was exhausted, mentally, physically, emotionally. His mind was running in circles, replaying the events of the past few days over and over, searching for a way out. Mark had always been the friend who never hesitated to speak his mind. The type of guy who saw through the noise and cut straight to the truth. Right now, Ethan needed that more than anything. Mark folded his arms across his chest and leaned forward. "All right, tell me everything. From the beginning." Ethan exhaled, rubbing his face with his free hands. "You already know what happened." "I know Claire accused you," Mark said. "I know the media has already crucified you. I know Rebecca is drowning in doubt, but I want to hear your version. I want to hear exactly what happened that night." Ethan clenched his jaw, then slowly began to recount every moment. The way Claire had changed over time. The way she had started getting too close. The way she had thrown herself at him that night in the kitchen. "She kissed me, Mark," Ethan said bitterly. "I pushed her away. I told her to leave." Mark listened intently, his expression unreadable. "And then?" "She left," Ethan said, his voice rough. "No yelling. No screaming. She just stormed out." He scoffed. "And the next morning, I wake up to cops at my door, and my entire life falling apart." Mark sat back, deep in thought. After a long silence, he let out a slow breath. "She's smart," he said finally. Ethan let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, no kidding." "No," Mark said. "I mean, really smart. She knew exactly how to play this. She planned this for months. She set the stage, gained your wife's trust, made sure you never suspected a thing. And then, when you rejected her, she flipped the entire narrative on you." Ethan's throat tightened. He had already figured that much out, but hearing someone else say it made it worse. "So, what do we do?" Mark smirked. "We expose the liar." Ethan frowned. "How? Everyone already believes her." Mark leaned in. "Not everyone. Rebecca's doubt begins to crack." Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. She hadn't been able to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face, the way he had looked at her during his arrest, the sheer shock in his expression. And then there was Claire. She had been so convincing. The bruises, the trembling voice, the tears. Rebecca had believed every word, but something wasn't sitting right. She had replayed that night in her head countless times. Something was missing. She had known Ethan for years. She had married him, built a life with him, raised children with him. He had never been violent. He had never lost control. And yet she had believed Claire's story almost instantly. Why? Because Claire had made sure she would. Rebecca's hands curled into fists. She needed answers. And there was only one place to get them. Mark and Ethan's plan. Mark wasn't one to sit around and wait. While Ethan was stuck in jail, he took matters into his own hands. Step 1. Dig into Claire's past. He started with the basics, social media, old records, anything that would give him insight into who she really was. What he found sent a chill down his spine. Claire Daniels had a pattern. Mark found an old-school newspaper article from when Claire was in high school. A teacher had been accused of inappropriate conduct with a student. The article was vague, but the name stuck out. Claire Daniels. The teacher had resigned before an investigation could be completed. No charges, no proof, just an accusation. Mark dug deeper. In college, Claire had accused a professor of the same thing. Again, no charges, but the professor left his job. 2 men, 2 accusations, no convictions. And now, Ethan. Mark sat back, running a hand through his hair. Claire wasn't just manipulative. She was dangerous. She had done this before. And she had gotten away with it. Until now. Mark picked up his phone and dialed a number. When the call connected, he didn't waste time. "Adam Carter," he said, "I've got a story for you. The journalist who could change everything." Adam Carter was a well-known investigative journalist, famous for uncovering wrongful convictions. He had exposed police corruption, corporate scandals, and now, Mark hoped, he'd be interested in Ethan's case. When Mark met him at a coffee shop, he wasted no time laying out the facts. "Claire Daniels is a serial liar," he said, sliding the documents across the table. She's done this before. Twice. No one ever questioned her. Adam scanned the papers, his brow furrowing. This is something. Mark leaned forward. We need proof. Real proof. Something that will force the world to listen. Adam nodded. Then let's get to work. Rebecca finds the truth. Rebecca sat at Ethan's old desk, staring at the small external hard drive she had found buried under a pile of papers. She had almost missed it, but now she couldn't ignore it. Her hands trembled as she plugged it into Ethan's laptop. The screen flickered before displaying a list of security footage files. She scrolled through the timestamps. And then she found it. The night Claire had accused Ethan. Rebecca took a shaky breath and clicked play. The grainy footage loaded, showing Claire standing in the living room. Ethan walked in from the kitchen. They spoke. Rebecca couldn't hear what was being said, but she didn't need to. She saw everything. Claire reached for Ethan. He stepped away. She moved in again. He pushed her hands off him. Claire's expression darkened. Then she stormed out of the house. No struggle. No violence. Nothing like what she had claimed. Rebecca's stomach lurched. She had been wrong. She had believed a lie. She had betrayed her husband. She had let an innocent man go to prison. Tears blurred her vision. She had to fix this. She had to fix everything. Claire's world begins to crumble. Claire was confident. Too confident. She thought she had won. But she didn't know what was coming. Mark and Adam had found a pattern. Rebecca had found the footage. And the world was about to see the truth. She was out of time. And for the first time in her life, Claire Daniels was about to lose. The walls begin to crack. Rebecca's realization. The lies unravel. Rebecca's hands trembled as she watched the footage again. She couldn't look away, couldn't stop the nauseating feeling that twisted in her gut. Claire had lied. She had set Ethan up. The woman Rebecca had welcomed into her home, trusted with her children. She had fabricated an entire assault and nearly destroyed their lives. Rebecca covered her mouth with her hand, bile rising in her throat. How could she have been so blind? How could she have let herself be manipulated so easily? Ethan had pleaded with her. He had looked her in the eyes and told her he was innocent, and she had doubted him. She had let that doubt poison her. Now, because of her, Ethan was in prison. And their children, their children, had been forced to believe their father was a monster. Rebecca's stomach twisted violently. She had to fix this. She had to destroy Claire Daniels. Her hands flew to her phone, fingers unsteady as she dialed. The line rang twice before Mark answered. Rebecca. She took a shaky breath. I found something. A pause. Then, Mark's voice was sharper. What do you mean? I found footage, she whispered. From the night she accused Ethan. It shows. She swallowed. It shows everything. Silence. Then, Mark exhaled sharply. Rebecca, listen to me. I need you to send that to me right now. Rebecca nodded, already clicking through the files. I will. But Mark, her voice wavered. What do I do? Another pause. Then, Mark's voice was steady. We enter. Claire's control begins to slip. Claire was on top of the world. Ethan was in jail. The public adored her. Social media was flooded with messages of support, her story being shared across news stations. It was everything she had wanted. Until she saw the headline. Journalist Adam Carter investigates babysitter's past. Could Ethan Reynolds be innocent? Claire's breath hitched. Her entire body went rigid as she clicked the article. Investigative journalist Adam Carter is looking into the case of Claire Daniels and Ethan Reynolds, uncovering shocking new information about Claire's past allegations against multiple men. Sources claim that Claire has a history of making similar accusations, raising questions about the validity of her claims against Reynolds. Could this case be built on lies? Claire's pulse pounded in her ears. No, 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 no. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had been careful. She had made sure everything lined up perfectly. So how had they found out? She gritted her teeth and grabbed her phone, dialing Rebecca's number. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Panic clawed at her chest. Rebecca had been on her side. She had been broken, too devastated to think clearly. Claire had made sure of that. But what if? No. She couldn't lose now. Not when she was so close. The pressure mounts. Meanwhile, Adam, Carter, and Mark sat in a dimly lit office, reviewing everything they had. Claire's history of false accusations. The security footage that showed Ethan rejecting her. The witness statements from past victims who had lost everything because of Claire's lies. Adam rubbed his chin. We have enough to break the story wide open. Mark leaned forward. But is it enough to free Ethan? Adam exhaled. That's the challenge. Public opinion is a powerful thing, and right now, the world believes Claire. Mark's eyes darkened. Then we change that. Adam hesitated. This isn't just about proving Ethan is innocent. We need Claire to confess. If she doesn't, the court might still side with her. Mark nodded slowly. Then we trap her. Adam raised an eyebrow. How? Mark smirked. We make her think she's still winning. Rebecca's confrontation. Rebecca wasn't afraid anymore. She had spent weeks drowning in guilt, in uncertainty, in fear. But now she was angry. She arrived outside Claire's apartment, her hands clenched at her sides. She wasn't going to be polite. She wasn't going to beg for answers. She was going to take Claire down. When Claire opened the door, she plastered on an innocent smile. Rebecca, I'm so glad you're here. I was worried about you. Rebecca shoved her way inside. Claire blinked. Ugh. Rebecca turned, glaring at her. You lied. Claire froze. Rebecca took a step closer, voice sharp. I found the security footage. Claire. Claire's face drained of color. Rebecca didn't stop. I saw you. You went after him. He pushed you away. You stormed out. Not a single second of that video shows an attack. Claire licked her lips, trying to compose herself. Rebecca. No. Rebecca snapped. You don't get to talk. Not after what you did. Not after what you took from me. Claire's fingers twitched, her breath quickening. You don't understand. Rebecca scoffed. Oh, I understand perfectly. You've done this before, haven't you? Other men. Other lies. Claire stiffened. Rebecca smirked. Yeah, we know. Adam Carter's going public with the evidence. Your past is about to come back to haunt you. Claire's mask cracked. Rebecca took another step forward. You destroyed my life. My kids' lives. You took everything from us. Claire's breathing became uneven. Rebecca leaned in. And now, you're going to lose. Claire snapped. She lunged, grabbing Rebecca's wrist. You don't get to do this, she hissed. I built this. I won. Rebecca yanked her arm free. Not anymore. She pulled out her phone, pressing a button. The recording app flashed on the screen. Claire's face paled as she realized what had just happened. Rebecca had gotten everything on tape. The beginning of the end. Hours later, the recording of Claire's admission was sent to Adam Carter. The story broke within minutes. Breaking news. New evidence proves Ethan Reynolds' innocence. Claire Daniels' story falls apart. A web of lies. Claire Daniels accused of fabricating assault claims. Social media erupted. Claire's perfect lie was shattered. And Ethan Reynolds. For the first time in months, he had hope. The reckoning begins. Ethan Reynolds sat on the edge of the thin prison cot, staring at the cracks in the concrete wall. He had stopped keeping track of time. The days blended together in a dull, endless cycle of hopelessness. But today was different. Today, he had hope. The guard's footsteps echoed down the hall, stopping outside his cell. Reynolds, the guard called. You've got a visitor. Ethan stood slowly, his muscles sore from weeks of tension. He had gotten used to these visits, his lawyer, Mark, the occasional empty stare from Rebecca, as she tried to figure out if she had made a mistake believing Claire. But when he stepped into the visitation room, he wasn't expecting what he saw. Rebecca sat across the table, her face pale but determined. And next to her, a man Ethan had never met before, a journalist, judging by the recorder and notepad in front of him. Ethan, Rebecca's voice cracked. I was wrong. Ethan froze. His heart pounded against his ribs. She had never said those words before. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just stared. Rebecca swallowed hard, gripping the table. I saw the footage. Claire lied. About everything. Ethan felt like the world had stopped spinning. She knew the truth. After all these months, after all the pain, after all the nights he spent rotting in this cell, she finally believed him. He let out a slow, unsteady breath. You're sure? Tears welled in her eyes. I got her on tape, Ethan. She confessed. Ethan's fists clenched under the table. A slow, burning rage curled in his stomach. Claire had done this much damage, and now she was caught. And he wasn't going to let her get away with it. Claire's world crumbles. Claire Daniels had always been in control. From the moment she stepped into Ethan's home, she had calculated every move. She had built a perfect story, painting herself as the fragile victim, the wronged woman, the survivor. She had won, or at least she thought she had. Until the headlines changed. Claire Daniels caught on tape, false allegations exposed. Journalist uncovers babysitter's trail of lies. Ethan Reynolds could be innocent. Public outrage as new evidence shakes high-profile case. The world turned against her. Claire scrolled through social media, her hands shaking. The comment sections were filled with rage, but not the kind she had wanted. This woman ruined an innocent man's life. She should be in jail. How many others has she done this to? Her phone rang. She didn't need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. Her lawyer. She exhaled sharply, her pulse pounding. The moment she answered, his voice was cold. Claire, he said flatly, we have a problem. Claire's grip on the phone tightened. I can explain. You don't need to explain to me, her lawyer snapped. You need to explain to the judge, because the prosecution is filing charges against you. Claire's entire body went numb. She staggered back, gripping the edge of the counter. They can't. They can, and they are, he said. Perjury, obstruction of justice, false accusations. Claire, you're looking at serious prison time. Claire's stomach twisted. This wasn't happening. She had controlled the narrative. She had won. How had it all fallen apart so fast? Listen to me, she hissed. We can fix this. We can say the recording was doctored. Her lawyer laughed bitterly. Claire, they have footage of you lying. They have a pattern of false accusations. This isn't just one mistake. This is a history. Claire's heart pounded. She had to think. She had to get ahead of this. She refused to go to prison. She had destroyed Ethan Reynolds. She wasn't going to let him destroy her. The courtroom showdown. Ethan sat in the defendant's chair, not as a man on trial, but as a man about to be freed. The courtroom was filled to the brim. Reporters lined the back. Spectators whispered. On the other side of the room, Claire sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression carefully neutral. But Ethan could see it, the panic in her eyes. She had lost control, and she knew it. The judge entered, and the courtroom fell silent. This hearing will determine the motion to overturn Ethan Reynolds' conviction in light of new evidence, the judge announced. The defense may present its case. Ethan's lawyer, Stephen Calloway, stood. Your Honor, Calloway said, his voice steady. We submit concrete evidence proving Claire Daniels fabricated her accusations. This includes a recorded confession, testimony from previous victims of false allegations, and security footage disproving her original claims. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge turned to the prosecution. "Do you have a counterargument?" The lead prosecutor, a woman who had once viciously pursued Ethan, stood. "No, Your Honor," she said, her voice tight. "Given the overwhelming evidence, the state withdraws its case against Mr. Reynolds." The room erupted. The judge banged the gavel. "Order." Silence fell. The judge turned to Ethan. "The conviction of Ethan Reynolds is hereby overturned. Mr. Reynolds, you are free to go." Ethan's breath hitched. It was over. He felt his lawyer pat his shoulder. He saw Mark grinning from the front row. He saw Rebecca, tears streaming down her face. He was free. And Claire. She was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs. The moment her wrists were cuffed, she snapped. "This isn't fair," she shrieked, struggling against the officers. "He's the liar. You can't do this to me." The cameras flashed. The journalists scribbled notes. And for the first time, Claire Daniels was seeing the world turn against her. Ethan stood tall, watching as she was dragged away. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He had lost everything because of her. But at least now, she was losing too. Aftermath. A broken life. The outside world felt different. Ethan inhaled deeply, his first breath of freedom. Mark clapped him on the back. "Told you we'd get you out." Ethan exhaled, nodding. "Yeah." Then he saw them. Rebecca, Ben and Lily. His children stood beside their mother, their expressions unreadable. They had believed he was a monster. And now, they didn't know what to believe. Rebecca took a step forward, her face streaked with tears. "Ethan." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "Don't," he said quietly. Rebecca flinched. Ethan clenched his fists. "You didn't believe me." His voice was cold. "You didn't even fight for me." Rebecca's face crumpled. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "You let Claire take everything from me." Silence hung heavy between them. Rebecca reached for his hand. "Please, Ethan, Ethan pulled away. "Not now," he murmured. Rebecca's face twisted with guilt, but she nodded. As Ethan turned away, he knew one thing for certain. He had won his freedom, but he had lost his family. And some wounds. They didn't heal. After the storm, Ethan Reynolds had spent the last 2 years living in a nightmare. A nightmare where his wife doubted him, where his children feared him, where the world saw him as a monster. Now he was free. But freedom didn't mean peace. As he walked away from the courthouse, the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on him like a steel vise. He could hear the reporters shouting his name, cameras flashing, microphones being shoved in his face. "Mr. Reynolds, how does it feel to be exonerated? What do you have to say about Claire Daniels' arrest? Do you think your wife will take you back?" That last question made him stop in his tracks. He turned his head slightly, catching sight of Rebecca standing nearby, her eyes red and swollen. Ben and Lily stood beside her, both looking unsure, caught between a father they barely recognized and a mother who had almost ruined everything. Ethan clenched his jaw and turned away. He wasn't ready for that yet. Not now. Maybe not ever. Mark caught up to him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You handled that better than I thought." Ethan let out a bitter chuckle. "I wanted to punch at least 3 of them." Mark grinned. "Yeah, but that wouldn't have looked good for a free man." Ethan sighed, glancing up at the sky. The sun was shining, the air crisp. It should have felt like a new beginning. But all he could feel was emptiness. Claire's fate. Claire Daniels sat in a cold jail cell, her hands still cuffed. She had never been on this side of things before. She had always been the one in control, the one telling the story, weaving the lies, playing the part of the innocent victim. Now she was trapped. The trial would be fast. The evidence was overwhelming. The recorded confession, the security footage, the past accusations that had finally caught up with her. She was facing 10 years for perjury, obstruction of justice, and filing false police reports. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the world turning against her. Her face was plastered all over the news, but instead of sympathy, there was rage. People she had fooled, the reporters, the women's advocacy groups, the celebrities who had championed her case, had abandoned her. She was hated, and no amount of manipulation could fix that. The cell door creaked open, and her lawyer stepped inside, his face unreadable. Claire swallowed hard. "Tell me you have good news." Her lawyer sat down across from her, shaking his head. "They're offering a deal," he said. "Plead guilty, serve 5 years, and you might get out on parole." Claire stiffened. 5 years. Her lawyer's gaze hardened. "Take it, Claire. If this goes to trial, they'll bury you." Claire clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had spent so long making sure Ethan suffered. Now she was the one paying the price. She had lost. And she knew it. Rebecca's plea. Rebecca sat in her car outside Ethan's apartment, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had been sitting there for nearly an hour, trying to find the courage to face him. She had lost count of how many times she had practiced this conversation in her head. But nothing felt right. How do you ask for forgiveness when you've done something unforgivable? She took a deep breath and got out of the car. When Ethan answered the door, he looked tired, worn, like a man who had lost too much. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rebecca swallowed and whispered, "Can we talk?" Ethan studied her for a long moment before stepping aside. Rebecca walked in, her heart pounding. The apartment was bare, nothing like the home they had shared. It was cold, lifeless, just like the space between them. She turned to face him. "Ethan, He held up a hand. "Before you say anything, I need to ask you one thing." Rebecca nodded slowly. Ethan's voice was low, almost broken. "Did you ever actually believe me?" Her heart shattered. She wanted to say yes. Wanted to say that deep down, she had known he was innocent. But that would be a lie. And Ethan had already been lied to enough. So she did the hardest thing she had ever done. She told the truth. I doubted you," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I let fear control me. I let Claire manipulate me." Tears welled in her eyes. "I should have fought for you. I should have believed in you. And I didn't." Ethan looked away, exhaling slowly. Rebecca stepped closer. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. But I need you to know that I regret every single second of it." Silence. Then Ethan looked back at her. "Do you know what prison does to a man, Rebecca?" His voice was cold, emotionless. She swallowed hard. "Ethan, I lost everything in there," he said. "I lost my job, my friends, my reputation. But worst of all, I lost my family." Rebecca felt her chest tighten. "You haven't lost us." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "Haven't I?" She took a step closer. "Ben and Lily need their father." Ethan's expression hardened. "And where were you when they needed me?" Rebecca flinched. She deserved that. She deserved all of it. But she wasn't going to give up. "I know I don't deserve another chance," she whispered. "But I'm asking for one anyway." Ethan was silent for a long time. Then, finally, he spoke. "I need time." Rebecca nodded, her throat tight. "Take all the time you need." And with that, she turned and walked away. A new beginning. Ethan stood on the edge of the beach, the cool ocean breeze brushing against his skin. It had been 3 months since he was released. 3 months of trying to rebuild a life that had been shattered. Mark had helped him find work. Nothing like the high-paying corporate job he used to have, but it was something. Rebecca had respected his request for space, but she still sent messages, hoping. His kids. That was the hardest part. Ben and Lily still didn't know how to talk to him. They were hesitant, unsure, caught between the father they remembered and the man they had been told to fear. It was going to take time, and Ethan was willing to wait, because now he was finally free. He turned his head slightly and saw Rebecca standing a few feet away, watching him. She didn't approach, didn't push, just waited. Maybe one day he would let her back in. Maybe one day things would be okay again. But for now, he was just going to breathe. And for the first time in years, Ethan Reynolds was in control of his own story.